Welcome back to Medical Terminology. Today we're going to cover Chapter 3, Body as a Whole. Some of the learning outcomes that we will have throughout this chapter will include roots and combining forms, suffixes, and prefixes to construct and analyze medical terms related to the anatomy and physiology of the body as a whole. We'll also spell and pronounce medical terms related to the body as a whole. We'll identify elements that compose the body and discuss the structures and functions of those cells. We'll also describe the 4 primary tissue groups found in the body, what distinguishes them between different organ systems and their major organs. Also, we will discuss the roles of DNA, genes, and medical genetics, and its applications in modern medicine. We'll describe the different anatomical positions, planes, and directions of the body. We will also map the body cavities and describe the abdominal quadrants of the 9 regions of the abdomen. We'll also apply knowledge of medical terms relating to the body as a whole in documentation, medical records, and communication. And we will finally wrap up with identify and correctly use abbreviations of terms used in anatomy and physiology related to the body as a whole. Let's get started. Organization of the body. The body is composed of many structures. The largest body structures are the organ systems. The organ systems are comprised of organs that are further composed of tissues. Tissues are composed of cells, which are made up of organelles. Organelles can further be broken down into molecules and then into microscopic atoms. A zygote is a single fertilized cell and the beginning of a human being. Fertilization occurs and a zygote is formed when a sperm cell enters an egg cell. This is demonstrated in the figure shown here. This microscopic zygote will divide and multiply millions of times to become a human being. Cytology is the study of cellular structures and function. Your understanding of the cell will form the basis of your knowledge of anatomy and physiology for every tissue and organ. Pronunciation. I will have you pronounce these terms along with me if you don't mind, and we'll talk about them a little bit more. Atom is a small unit of matter. It's the smallest element of the human body. Next we have blastocyst, and that is the name given during the first 2 weeks of a developing embryo after fertilization occurs. Holistic means pertaining to the whole. Tissue is a collection of similar cells. Each type of tissue in a particular organ is made up of the same type of cells. Then we have zygote. That is a fertilized egg. Word analysis. Next we're going to break down words into elements that can assist you in defining the word. So as you can see in cellular we have cellule, which is pertaining to a cell. Organelle has organ as part of having a cell having specialized functions. Then we have molecular, molec, which also means a very small particle. All cells must carry out the following basic functions of life. Any errors in these functions will cause deformities or death. Manufacture of proteins and lipids provides nutrition for the cells. Production of the energy in order to carry out cellular function. Communication with other cells allows proper carrying out of functions. Cells communicate with each other by sending hormones to each other, which include messages. Think of hormones as a letter in the mail. A person, or in this case a cell, communicates with another by sending a mailed hormone message to another to read. Replication of their own individual DNA controls heredity. If DNA is copied wrong, cellular death or deformities can occur. Cancer is an example of a cell replicating the wrong DNA. Reproduction provides new cells in place of those that die. In this figure, it illustrates the many parts of a cell. Individual cell parts are called organelles. Each organelle has its own job to perform within the cell. The outermost covering of a cell is called the cell membrane. Its function is to give the cell shape and to protect it from the outside environment. Cytoplasm is the clear fluid within the cell in which the organelles float. Cytoplasm, clear gelatinous substance that forms the substance of a cell that surrounds the nucleus. Mitochondria, organelles that generate, store, and release energy for cell activities. They are the energy plant of the cell. Mitochondria is a good example of a non-S plural and is derived from mitochondrion. Deoxyribonucleic acid, better known as DNA, is the source of hereditary characteristics. The nucleus is the largest organelle of the cell. Most cells have a nucleus. Red blood cells do not have one. However, some liver and muscle cells contain many nuclei. The DNA responsible for duplicating the cell is found in the nucleus. The nucleus is surrounded and protected by a nuclear membrane which has small openings called pores. Did you know the nucleus directs all of the activities of a cell? It is the control center of a cell. Ribosomes manufacture proteins which the body requires to survive. Protein is fuel and food for the body. Catabolism has atabol in it, which is the breakdown of complex substances into simpler ones, such as a part of metabolism. Endoplasmic reticulum, use the word plasm to remember this, and reticule, structure inside a cell that synthesizes steroids, detoxifies drugs, and manufactures the cell membrane. Lysosomes, lyso, actually a combining form, the enzyme that digests foreign material. Then we have nucleus, which has nucleo, another combining form, small mass within the nucleus that manufactures ribosomes that manufacture protein. Next, we're going to talk about tissues. There are 4 primary tissue groups within the body. Connective tissue binds, supports, protects, fills spaces, and stores fat. Some examples of connective tissue could be bone, blood, cartilage, and fat. Epithelial tissue protects, secrete, absorb, and excrete. An example of epithelial tissue would be the skin and the lining of internal organs and glands. Next, we're going to talk about muscle and how it controls movement. An example of muscle tissues would be skeletal muscle that attaches to bones, smooth muscle found in internal organs, and cardiac muscle found in the heart. Nervous tissue also transmits impulses for coordination, motor impulses, and sensory reception. An example of nervous tissue would be your brain, spinal cord, and nerves. What are all 3 bones of the knee joint? The tibia, femur, and patella. What's the difference between cartilage and ligaments? Cartilage is a rubbery, flexible substance. Ligaments are strips or bands of tough connective tissue. What structure attaches muscle to bone? That would be a tendon. What purpose does synovial fluid serve? It allows the joint to move freely without friction. It also supplies nutrients to the joint cartilages. What is the function of a joint capsule? It is attached to the tibia and the femur. It encloses the joint cavity and is made of thin, cartilaginous, fibrous connective tissue. I'm going to use this example here to illustrate how adding a prefix or a suffix to a root changes the meaning. So for example, we have osteoblast, that is a bone-producing cell. Next we have an osteoclast, that is a bone-removing cell. And then we have an osteocyte, which is a bone-maintaining cell. Each one of these are different types of cells. The body is made up of 11 organ systems: the integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, digestive, respiratory, and reproductive. Next, we're going to talk about genetics and genetic medicine. DNA, there are 46 molecules of DNA inside the cell nucleus. Information is stored as a code of 4 chemical bases. Then we have mitosis, replication, so that when the cell divides, each new cell has the exact copy of DNA present in the old cell. Mutations, the alteration of the nucleotide sequence of a genome, may or may not produce visible changes. Then we have a chromatin, thin strands of DNA. Then chromosomes, that's 22 pairs densely coiled bodies. Genetic medicine. Personalized medicine can assist with the preventive care. Genotype mutations such as BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes if there is a family history of breast or ovarian cancer. Cytogenetics is the study of chromosome abnormalities to determine a cause for developmental delays, mental retardation, and birth defects. Gene therapy is an experimental technique used to place mutated genes that cause disease within a healthy copy. Predictive medicine looks at the probability of a disease and allows preventive measures to be taken. Anatomical position, planes, and directions. It is when the body is standing erect with the feet flat on the floor, face and eyes facing forward, and arms at the side with the palms facing forward. Which is distal, the wrist or the elbow? In this case, distal is the furthest part of attachment, so the wrist would be distal, which is proximal, the hip or the knee. Now, proximal is the closest point of attachment. We're talking about to the trunk, so in this case it would be the hip. Which structure is superior, the shoulders or the hips? Superior is the medical term for above, so in this case the shoulders would be superior. Supine position when you're flat on your back, and prone position is when you lie flat on your stomach. Think of supine, if you're laying on your back, you can look up and see a pine tree. Think of prone position, you're laying on your stomach, you are prone to an attack because you can't see what's behind you. Hopefully those two will help you remember those terms. Also with proximal and distal, think of distal as in distance, a distance away. Proximal, think of it approximately, which means that's a close guess, right? So proximal might be easy to remember in that way. And the opposite of superior is inferior. So inferior would be caudal. Caudal also means tailbone, so it's going down towards it. A lot of times when you see this directional term used will be in terms of like a CT scan, which are cranial caudal scans, which means they go from the top of the head and they go down the body, go down the trunk to the tailbone. So they're scanning in that direction. All right, anatomical positions and directions. Superior or cephalic refers to what is above something, whereas inferior or caudal refers to something that is below something. Distal refers to being situated away from the center of the body or point of attachment, whereas proximal refers to being close to that center of the body or point of attachment. Medial refers to being close to the midline, whereas lateral means being further away from the midline. The midline is an imaginary line that divides the body into equal left and right sides. Next, we're going to describe the difference between these two terms. So caudal is near the tail versus cephalic, which is near to the head. So cephalo, we can think of that being our brain. Caudal, you can think of that as your tailbone. All right, supine, lying on the back, versus prone, lying on the stomach. Proximal is near to the center of the body versus distal, which is farther from the center of the body. Remember, our abdomen tends to be where our center of the body is. All right, the body is viewed through imaginary slices producing flat surfaces that pass through the body. There are three major anatomic planes. We have our transverse or horizontal, sagittal, and our frontal or coronal. Superior is above the waist, inferior is below the waist. Anatomical planes. The sagittal plane divides the body into equal left and right sides. The frontal plane divides the body into front anterior and the back posterior sides. The transverse plane divides the body into cranial and caudal portions, or top and bottom. Coronal or corone means crown, pertaining to the vertical plane dividing the body into anterior and posterior portions. Ventral or ventra means belly, pertaining to the belly or situated near the belly. Dorsal or dorso means back, pertaining to the back or situated behind. So what I use for these with coronal, crown, helps me remember we're talking about the head. Ventral, if you're sitting inside of a car and the vents, the AC is blowing on you through the vents, it's blowing on the front of you. Ventral, that's that front side. Dorsal, I think of a dolphin or a killer whale with a dorsal fin. It's on their back. It's a good way to remember those. Here we're going to look at the 5 cavities. We have cranial, spinal, thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic. The cranial cavity is the space inside the skull. The spinal cavity is the space in which the spinal cord passes. The thoracic cavity houses the lungs and heart, and the abdominopelvic cavity includes the abdominal and pelvic cavity. The diaphragm sits between the thoracic and the abdominal cavity. Next, we're going to talk about our quadrants and regions. The abdomen is divided into 4 quadrants. First, we have our right upper quadrant, followed by our left upper quadrant. Then we have the right lower quadrant and the left lower quadrant. The abdomen can also be divided into 9 regions. The central is called the umbilical region. The areas above and below that region are named relative to the stomach. Epigastric for above, hypogastric for below. The 6 remaining regions are located on the right and left of the central region. The abdominal quadrants are right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant. The abdominal regions from the superior to inferior are epigastric regions with the hypochondriac region on either side. Bear this in mind, though they are the two top sections or regions, they do have the term hypo, which can mix you up and make you think that that term belongs below something. In this case, it's talking about below the cartilage, because chondri is your word part for cartilage. And the cartilage it's pertaining to is the cartilage of the sternum. Umbilical region is the lumbar region on either side, and then we have hypogastric, which is the region with the inguinal region on either side. The subcostal line separates the epigastric and umbilical regions. The intertubercular line separates the umbilical and the hypogastric regions. Here are the differences between the following two terms, whose root means stomach. So as we can see, we have epigastric. Epi means upon or over. Hypogastric means below the stomach. So one of these is talking about a region above the stomach, and the other one is explaining the region below the stomach. And thank you so much for joining me. That's all I have today. I'll see you next time.